Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to join. Our attendees are definitely coming in, flowing in. So let's just give them about 2 or 3 minutes to join. Thank you. We'll start shortly. Okay, let's kick off. So again, good afternoon and welcome to our LexisNexis webinar today in partnership with Clyde & Co. and the Johannesburg Attorneys Association. So we're going to be talking to you today about research for the modern legal practitioner, and we're very pleased to host a very special person today. His name is Azhar Aziz Ismail, and he's joining us. He's very kindly agreed to share some of his time with us today. So let me tell you very briefly about what we're going to be covering today, and also just a little bit of a rundown in terms of events. So we'll be kicking off shortly. We're going to be taking you through a couple of tips and tricks that Azhar is going to be sharing with us today. Our content is, because of the diverse nature of the people that are joining us in our event today, we are going to be touching on a wide range of information. We're going to start with the basics though. So we're going to start at the bottom for someone who's quite junior to the profession, and then we're going to build up from there in terms of our content and our approach on this topic, so that we cover everyone's needs that's attending this session today. So please stay tuned. And stay with us as we start to cover the content today. A couple of other things as well. We are going to be answering some questions at the end of the session. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to pose those questions to us, so that we can start to collect them and filter through them. Some of them we'll answer during the course of the session, and some of them we'll keep for the end of the session. Our aim is to try and get through all of the questions that you have posed to us today. There have been a lot of comments in the build up to the session around whether we're going to be showing a recording. We understand that some attendees were unable to attend our live event. So rest assured, there will be a recording that will be sent out to everyone that's registered for this event. And you will be able to catch that in your own time and space. So that's great. What other housekeeping tips do I need to tell you? So we'd like to keep, Azar and I, we like to keep engagement really high during the sessions that we facilitate. So feel free to drop your comments or any suggestions that you have into the chat feature, again, at the bottom of your screen there. And we're going to kick off by asking people to tell us, while we do an intro, we're going to ask people to tell us their names, share their names with us, and then also tell us, hey, where are you joining us from today? So I'll start. I'm Purusha. And I'm joining you guys from Durban, so the south coast of South Africa today. Azar, you want to come off mute for a moment and just tell people where you're joining us from?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Purusha and LexisNexis, for having me today. So I'm joining us from Johannesburg, the lovely center of South Africa.
Center of South Africa. Love that, Azar. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about Azar. Azar is a knowledge lawyer. He's developing and managing the knowledge department at Clyde & Co in Africa, and he represents the Gauteng Attorneys Association as well as the Johannesburg Attorneys Association as the youngest executive member heading the knowledge and legal technology portfolio. He is an alumni, and he is now a faculty member of the, apologies, let me just go back here. And he is a faculty member of the Legal Technology and Innovation Institute, the LT&I, which delivers the Global Legal Technology and Innovation Certificate. Last year, Azar was instrumental in launching the inaugural LawTech Live conference in South Africa with the London-based Legal Technology and Innovation Institute, as well as LexisNexis as their partner. Azar has extensive experience in dispute resolution, including commercial litigation and insurance litigation, including matters concerning public liability, professional indemnity and aviation, risk incident management, privacy and data protection, learning and development, and internet content management. He's also got a real keen interest in the fields of legal technology and innovation, cyber law, privacy and data protection, risk and compliance, and Islamic finance, banking and law. Sharia law. We're very, very proud to have him as part of our panel today. So Azar, thank you and welcome to our session today. We're gonna kick things off now. Before I do, I just want to have a quick look at the chats panel to see, oh wow, we've got some really great attendees today. Fast spread from Cape Town to Johannesburg.
I see we got someone from Germany also.
I know, look at that, Aaron. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Melissa from Pietermaritzburg. Hey, you're my neighbor, Melissa. Thank you for showing up. Okay, is it in today? Yeah, thank you all. So yeah, thank you. Keep the comments coming and keep the engagement high in the chat. We're looking forward to hearing from you. It helps us so that we're not talking into a void. So please keep that engagement coming. Okay, so Azar, let's kick off if you're ready to do so.
100%.
Perfect. Okay, so Azar, firstly, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So, as you heard from Purusha's very kind introduction, I am currently heading up our knowledge department, but I really do have a passion about legal research, research memos. I think it is one of our foundations, especially we've got such a wide audience here. Some of the people in our audience will be recipients of internal legal memos, and others will be drafting those. And I learned the hard way when I was a junior, actually before starting my articles, in fact, from a little story when I was in law clinic in campus, the importance of having the right format and structure of a legal research memo. So I'm hoping to share some advice on some of those basics, and then tuning into my legal tech side. A lot of interesting discussions on the modern legal researcher that I'm looking forward to share and discuss with Purusha and everyone here today.
Thank you, Azar. So take us through legal research for the modern day legal practitioner. What are some of the important themes that we need to bear in mind?
So I think, as lawyers, our job principally involves a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a little bit less speaking, for some others, quite a lot of speaking. We engage in legal analysis, argument, explanations, and persuasion on a daily basis. A lot of this takes place in writing. So to do our job well, we need to have a proper legal knowledge, good research and interpretation skills, as well as clear expression. Sometimes for some of us, legal interpretation can be a little bit difficult because most of our legal interpretation is enshrined in judgments or legal textbooks. This can sometimes be a bit lengthy, a bit complex, and we need to work a little bit harder as lawyers to make sure we provide accurate, clear, and concise advice and recommendations for our clients, because providing our clients with the legislation won't always be the most direct way to do it. It's our job as lawyers to provide them with that advice, but also tell them what the law is in a simple way that's easy for them to understand. That's where the legal research memo comes in.
Thanks for setting that context for us, Azar. And we're just seeing a summary of some of those points on our screen now. Azar, is there anything that you want to add?
I think for me, just to lay the foundation to this, it's quite important that we put a lot of emphasis from a junior level on the importance of legal research. Sometimes we don't all get very excited when someone tells you, I need you to do research on something. We like, oh, it can be a bit hectic. And the reason why we psychologically don't always like legal research is because we feel it's going to take hours and we're going to struggle to find the research. But as a modern legal practitioner, there's a lot of exciting tools that we can use. And if we use those tools correctly and efficiently, you'll actually see how much fun legal research can be and how accurately and efficiently you can find your research, just knowing how to use your tools at your disposal.
Thanks, Azar. I think those are some great starting points and good tips to start whetting our appetite for more to come. Okay, so moving on then. Let's talk about, you mentioned research memos in your brief. You also mentioned about starting off as a young fledgling attorney. I'm not going to ask how many years ago that was and give it away, but give us a little bit more insight, right? Tell us where to start, how to navigate this.
Perfect. Again, just to emphasize what Purusha said before I give the answer, we are laying the foundation first for the juniors joining on the call, as there are a significant amount of juniors, and then we'll build to the juicy bits that everyone is here for. But when we start off with the legal research, some of my favorite tips, especially, you've just started articles, or you're a law student and you're in law clinic, or you're junior associate still, some of my favorite tips to share is, firstly, understand the instructions you're receiving from your senior and seek clarity where you're unsure. So for example, if someone tells you, find a recent case, sometimes ask, what does recent mean? It could mean the last month or within the last 3 years. But be careful of taking this also to be very literally. For example, you don't want to ignore a precedent-setting judgment that might have come from about 4 years ago if the brief was to focus just on the recent case law from the last 3 years. So remember to be outcome focused. And I think that's one of the things that's important, and it leads me to my next point. We need to understand, do we have all the information that we need? Are there any specific facts that need to be considered? We need to understand that context in the back, so that we can understand, why are we doing this research? If we understand why we're doing it, what's the extra pieces of information that we have, we can then know, okay, yes, my instruction was look at the last 3 years, but we're trying to look at developments in the law. The last development was in the last 4 years. Sometimes check in with spellings of names that were given to you. Sometimes, you may just get a note and say, find this case. The spelling may not always be the best. So double check those spellings to your searches. Check if you're missing any information, or if you're unclear on what the themes of this case were. If you did not understand, juniors, the most important thing is ask for clarity. No one is going to bite your head off. Ask. That context helps give you a bit of understanding into the importance, it's important for you to understand where does your research fit into the wider piece of work. We're obviously not going to circulate an internal research memo to your client, but what's quite important is to understand what it's going to be used for. Is it just for a quick internal undertaking, to have an understanding of what's the latest areas of the law, or is it for a client piece? Because often, and that's where the importance of a structure of a research memo comes, and we're going to talk about it in a bit. Often what we find is that your research and your may be extracted and used inside a client opinion. So make it easy, build that credibility, build that brand, and tie it all in by formatting things quite nicely. And that leads to the next thing. Understand what is your expectation on format and length of research, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. And more importantly, and I think for everyone who's junior on the call, this is the most frequent question you may hear, or you may ask: when is that research required? That's an important to understand. Sometimes it's required immediately, sometimes you've got a week turnaround. So you need to look at those pieces of information, have an understanding of what you're looking at before you get started.
And, as I think that these tips that you're sharing with everyone today is really great and well placed, especially for the juniors, right, that are joining, because remember, starting off as a candidate attorney or being a, junior associate, it's all about your personal brand, right? And building your reputation within the law firm. I mean, what's the intention, right? To grow your career within the organization that you're with, right? And these little tips over here just help grow your personal brand. They help showcase you to the senior practitioners within the organization in the professional light that you want to cultivate. So thanks for giving us some insights around this one particularly.
And to tell you a little bit on that importance of that personal brand as a junior, I think a little bit of research, but why this is so important is it helps develop your career and shape your career path. If you are going to be the person who's known as reliable, the go-to when it comes to research, the person who I love reading their research memos because I know I'm going to get what they want, that reputation is going to go a long way. You don't know where people in your career will go. You may, in 5 years, meet someone and who you did your articles with. So all of those are small little pieces, and building that brand and that credibility really does help you. Someone who could be your senior today could be your client tomorrow, or whatever the journey, wherever the journey takes you. So it's important to continue building that brand and really be authentic and true to yourself.
Thanks, Azar. Okay, let's move on then. So the context is set. We've asked all of the questions that we need to in order to receive the instruction. We've understood, we've taken notes in terms of the brief. Now we've received the instruction, right? Tell us, what do we need to do next in terms of breaking down the instruction and digesting it?
So one of the biggest mistakes that are made is people run onto that hamster wheel and just keep running. And you're going to keep running and you're going to struggle to get off. So I say before we start running and we get onto the hamster wheel and run in in one direction on that hamster wheel, but you're going to get lost in that, I would say the first thing is identify the parameters of your research, right? Now, when we're taking you through the steps, I don't mean literally spend an hour looking at each of these things, but it really does form part of your habits with time. It'll be second nature to you to actually look at the instruction you've received or look at the notes you've made when you're receiving that instruction and identify the basic parameters of your research. It's important to understand what those parameters are from the beginning. So for example, your instruction could be limited just to South Africa, or it could be applicable just to the bylaws applicable to, let's go with Durban because Parusha's from Durban. So it really does depend on what those parameters are, and that will tell you on how deep dive you need to look at other things. That's not to say you should discard information that are outside of those parameters. They may be influential, but your core focus needs to be on what's within those parameters. So it's important to understand those parameters. Now, this often involves taking a step back from the detail, because we often get lost in those details, and just look at the broader framework, understand the context of what it's needed. Now, taking a little bit of time to do this will ensure that your task is properly understood. It will reduce mistakes and it will help you streamline your research, which you'll understand in a little bit when I show you a few tricks of mine when doing legal research.
Thanks, Cesar. And thanks for the shout out to Durban as well and showing the love to Durban. I appreciate it. Okay, so we understand the instruction now. We're ready to begin with our task. What are the next steps that we should focus on?
So once you've understood your instruction, you've looked at those background facts, you've understand your parameters, the next thing for you to do is for yourself outline the issues that you need to consider. What is it that you're answering, or what is it that you need to answer the query, and what are all the relevant sources that you need to look at? And now's the time where we can start jumping onto that treadmill. Now we're moving away from the hamster wheel. We're going onto a treadmill, and we're going to start doing our research. We're going to use all of our reliable resources that we've learned about in law school, and we're going to start doing the research. Now, what I would recommend everyone does is you need to look at the different queries. Sometimes it may be one or two questions that you're asking that you need to answer. Other times, for more complicated methods, you may need to set out a sequence of different questions that need to be answered. Now, this is sometimes quite helpful, especially for a later stage when we get down to writing that research memo a little bit later. Now, another thing that's quite important is when you're doing your research, please make sure that you use credible research platforms to conduct your research, because you need to be wary of using Google as your first point of call. Yes, it is a lovely resource that helps direct us to different resources, but avoid that being your first point of call. Wikipedia should, in my view, never be used as a source of information. It is quite dangerous to rely on this because the information is either inaccurate, it's not updated. Anyone can go onto Wikipedia and edit the content. So I would say rely on more reliable research resources that you've learned about in law school or in campus. Because another thing about using Google or Wikipedia as a source of information, you can't cite these random sites quite easily, and it's not the most credible reference resources. So that's one of my tips. Another tip that I have got is keep a trail of your research. So say, for example, you use LexisNexis and then you hopped onto these different platforms, and then you started using Google as a last resort, and you found some interesting articles. Keep a trail of all the documents reviewed, because sometimes you open an article that leads you to another article that leads you to a case. Keep a record of the trail. It's helpful to keep a record of the trail, because whether or not you use it, it may help direct you to something else. And in a week's time, someone's going to ask you, oh, where did you find that piece of information? How did you find it? And you may not always remember. So keeping this trail will help you double check your research and answer any questions. And that basically takes us to sort of the next step. Once you've consulted all of your resources, you can now use the resources to answer the questions that you set out for yourself from your instruction.
Thanks, Cesar. My two big takeaways from what you've just gone through is as you've said on your slide over here, right? You can't reference it, don't rely on it, and don't use it. Love it. And the other thing that you mentioned around keeping the research trail, I think I find that quite particularly helpful, right? Because the other value add over there is that if you have a senior coming to you and asking you, hey, why did you disregard this particular case? Like, you can go back to your research trail and actually see your path into your research and say, okay, I disregarded this case because maybe the facts didn't apply, or it wasn't relevant to the matter at hand, or it had nothing to do with the research topic, or perhaps it was a judgment that was actually disregarded by a higher court later down the line. So I think that's really, really helpful. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've done it. We've gotten our brief. We've broken down the instruction. We have conducted our research. So now it's all about presentation, right? What do we do here now? How do we make a compelling research memo?
Now, before we jump into that compelling research memo, the first question, and I drew reference to it a little bit earlier, is how should you present that, right? And this drives back to the core of your instruction. Your instruction will help dictate the format that you need to follow, the length and the presentation of your research. Now, if you're asked to quickly do brief research on something that's going to probably use for internal use, and it's a short answer that they want, they don't want a whole long story about the background. They just want to know what is the point in law in this? Probably you're going to be using an email. In most instances, though, you will be preparing a research memo. Now, you need to fill the room. And if you're unsure, ask again, do you want a memo? Do you want an email? Most instances where you are using it for internal reasons, it's quite nice to do it in a memo because you can always refer back to it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit interesting things about memos and why we format them in a specific way in a little bit.
Thanks, Azar. And I love that anecdote that you're about to share with us. Please go ahead and do.
Okay, so I'm now going to talk about our format and structures of format and structure of a research memo. And again, lovely questions coming through, and we will take some of them at the end. But when it comes to the format and structure of your memo, my biggest step is sort of set it out in a structured approach. So I would say start off basically with your introduction. Now, this is where we state the exact questions that the research memo is answering. Remember, we drew out the questions when we were breaking down the stuff for us a little bit earlier to understand it. It's helpful to provide context because someone who's not involved in the matter can understand what's going on. And that's quite important. The next thing that we sort of look at is doing an executive summary, because sometimes our memos can sometimes be a bit long-winded. As lawyers, we love to talk, we love to write, and they can be a bit long-winded. And sometimes people just need a bit of a shorter grasp of what's happening, and then they can read the further details later on. So inside the executive summary, you're going to be setting out a short answer or a brief answer to the question. It should be written so that the reader can get the answer and the recommended next steps as well. It's basically going to be titled spoiler alert, but it is what we're going to be doing. And just by reading the introduction and executive summary, your reader can get the grasp of everything you're saying. Now, the remainder of your research memo is there to give more reasoning and understanding on how you get to that answer. It's also helpful to outline what was explored in the rest of the memo in your executive summary. So depending on your matter and context, it may be helpful to include a list of meta documents that were considered, depending on the type of research memo that you're doing. If it's a very long list, you could have a separate section instead of it being part of your executive summary, but those are in exceptional circumstances.
Thanks, Azar.
Now,
let's move. Go for it. Sorry.
We can move to the next one.
Okay, fantastic.
And that's basically where we're going next. So we've looked at our introduction. We've looked at our introduction or executive summary. We're now looking at the body. Now, this is where we're setting out our factual background and our detailed analysis. A general rule for me is that your research memo should be a standalone document. And this is the tip I was talking about a little bit earlier. I always say that you should try and give a little bit more detail inside your memo so it can be read as a standalone document. Someone coming onto a matter, someone or an expert assisting you, a senior attorney coming in and advising you shouldn't have to have a whole suite of files to go through in order to understand what's going on in your memo. So this is why your body is important. It's after we've given the answer, now they want to understand how you got to that answer. We're now going to look at extracting the key statutory sections, case law quotes into the memo, using clear and logical defined terms, using subheadings. I love subheadings, and formatting that's proper, using bold and underlined to direct attention, italics for quotes. Make sure that you use paragraphs. Common mistake that I see is people don't use paragraphs. It's quite lumped in together. Having paragraphs and subparagraphs just helps it easier to read and reference. So quite helpful to have your structure in that format. And then now that we've given our body, so the client already has, or rather your senior already has the answer in the beginning, but now you're getting to explain the rationale. You've given all the facts, you've given everything you've considered, and next is moving forward. Here you can restate the answer to the question. And more importantly, this is where we give a little bit more detail on our recommended actions following your research memo. Now, this point is for juniors. It's not meant to be going for clients. For clients, you always have to be strictly correct. But juniors, this isn't a great opportunity to show initiative, build that personal brand with your seniors, and try and give the next steps. What do you think those next steps are going to be? Because it really does give us an understanding that you're thinking beyond the immediate task. It's a good way to stay involved in a matter beyond that specific task that your fee earner has given you. So quite helpful to have a moving forward and next steps. And that's where we come to the next bit, and people often ask with referencing and whether or not you should use footnotes. I know in law school, in campus, we were all about Harvard referencing style or TSA referencing style. There were so many referencing styles that we had to learn and use and adapt from to be compliant for assignments and using Turnitin. There's no Turnitin when you're submitting research memos, but you need to give credit where credit is due. Your thoughts are based on someone else's ideas or other sources of information. It's also helping to check the credibility of your information. So that's where we're now going to start with our referencing so that the reader can pinpoint the relevant parts of the case or legislation that you're referring to. Make sure that you cite the specific sections or the specific paragraph numbers. In most instances, the referencing method is not of importance as long as the sources are cited, right? And when presenting your research memo to your seniors, it's quite handy to provide them and attach the key cases and legislation that you considered. And there's something really cool that I love using. Now, one of my favorite platforms is Lexis Library, and one of the reasons that I like to use it is because there's something called a folder. I love saving all of my resources in that specific folder. So if the question ever does come back and say, well, where's this case that you refer to? Where's this piece of legislation that you refer to? I don't always have to go through that hunt of going back. And again, that's where your document trail comes in. So it's a good way to have a document trail. So yeah, just some tips from me on that front of writing your research memo.
Thanks, Azar. So you've taken us through the formatting of the research memo, which is really, really great. And we're going to move on to some additional tips that you have when it comes to just broad tips in terms of compiling the research memo now. You want to take us through them?
Perfect. Before I do, I see we've got some exciting questions coming through. So just want to remind those were the questions. Seeing it, we will get to your questions a little bit later. With regards to my top tips, now I've taken some time drafting these. Often I get these questions from candidate attorneys in the firm, and I thought to share them. Again, we're still on the junior section. We're getting to the juicy bit in a little bit, but I'm sure quite a few people can agree with me when it comes to these top tips. Firstly, use clear short sentences. Right, we need to avoid drafting also in the passive voice. So when you're drafting your sentences, draft in the present active voice. So as an example, I've put a lovely example on the screen. So the client is required by the civil procedure rules to to file a defense within 14 days after service of the claim form. An extension of up to 28 days to file a defense is permitted where an acknowledgement of service has been filed or by agreement between the parties. The client failed to do whatever they failed to do, as opposed to, that's the one, the client had been required to file a defense within 14 days, and the extension of up to 28 days would have been permitted if. You can see, even just by reading it, you're like, oh, my brain. So avoid the passive voice, right? Use the active voice. Now, make use of numbered paragraphs and subparagraphs so these can be easily referenced, like I mentioned earlier. Use bullet points in certain instances to help give sort of clarity on the next steps that need to be considered. Now, another thing that's quite helpful, often we're going to be referring to quite a few different things throughout your memo. Sometimes these have longer names, and it can be quite tedious to make sure you're referring to those longer names so many times. So I love to define, but at the same time, there's defining and then there's overdoing with the definitions. The last thing you want is to have a memo that every second or third word is just that definition. So I love aviation. I love drones. So the example is modeled after drones. An example is an unmanned aerial vehicle, also known as a drone, but in a more formal setting, known as unmanned aerial vehicle in certain instances. you can define something like that to be used as UAV. So in your first use, you'll say unmanned aerial vehicle, and then in quotation marks and in brackets, you'll say UAV. Now, this really does set the tone for the rest of the memo, that the reader knows for UAV what it means. Because remember, the research memo is not a contract. In the beginning of a contract, you have a list of definitions. You're not going to have that in your research memo. So it's good to have it that way there. Another way to use definitions is when referring to different people. Different people have different positions or roles in a matter. So we're going to use Selena Gomez as an example, and say you refer to Miss Selena Gomez in the memo, instead of keep on saying Miss Selena Gomez or Miss Gomez or Miss Selena, to ensure that consistency, because consistency is key. One of the biggest tips I can tell you is define it in the beginning, define her. So for example, we've got Miss Selena Gomez, and in brackets say the defendant, because that is what she is in the matter. For the rest of the memo, you can then refer to her as the defendant, and you don't have to worry about consistency. So it's really a little hack to make sure that you've got that consistency when drafting. Now, another tip that I like to give, be careful when including casual terms of exaggeration when expressing an opinion in your assessment. For example, the use of the words very or extremely. Casual words of exaggeration can disproportionately elevate the importance of a point or opinion. Remember, it is your opinion that you're expressing, but rather, if you need to use words of exaggeration, try to use a little bit more professional terms, such as substantial or significant, unless the casual words of exaggeration are more appropriate, because they are directly quoted from a judgment, for example, or when referring to something as likely, the term very is not necessary. So remember, or mentioned, include your references. For example, the specific section of the Act, it really helps you tie it in. If you just say the Employment Equity Act said, or per the Employment Equity Act, you now have to go back and find where it was. What if you say Section 53 of whatever Act says this, it's easy for you to pinpoint, and it's easy for the reader to understand your source of information. And remember to check your work. And there's something cool that I want to share that I'm really excited about. There's a lot of tools in the market that's so cool, but I haven't seen something so interesting like this that helps with this. But I'm first going to tell you what you need to check out for. Make sure that there's no typographical errors, specifically your grammar, sentence structure, and punctuation. Sometimes it's helpful. What I find is printing a copy of what I typed and then reading it. It just looks a little bit different. Right? Make sure that all your amendments have been made. Sometimes your senior would have made amendments in your printed copy and given it back to you. Go back and just make sure that you've given effect to all those amendments. Or if you've got a document with track changes, before just clicking accept all, or if you haven't clicked accept all, make sure you look at the comments to see that there's no other amendments for you to make. Make sure that you've covered all the necessary topics. So we're going back to our prep stage, right? In our prep stage, when we're busy preparing before doing the research memo, we wrote down the questions that need to be answered from the instruction. Make sure that we've canvassed all of those questions that we needed to answer. And then this is the fun bit. Case citations, cross-references, attachments, and annexures are all correct. Your case citations, it's very, very important to make sure that you've got the correct case citations and that you're consistent with your fonts, formatting, references, and citations throughout the memo. Now, I promise you, I'm not part of LexisNexis. I'm not paid for anything. I just really love this tool, and it's something that I'm looking to get. LexisNexis recently showed me something really cool called Lexis Check, and that helps me check my documents, scan through the document with a click of a button and check that my citations are one correct, that they're consistent. So Purusha can probably talk a lot more about that, but it's something that I saw and I was like, wow, that really takes you to the next level when it comes to doing your research, or rather for seniors also, to make sure that your juniors are actually giving you the correct information. The last thing you want as a junior is to come back and say your citations are incorrect or you are not consistent. And it's now easier for everyone to pick that up. So yeah, those are some of my favorite tips.
Thanks, Azar. And just talking about Lexis Check, right? It actually connects to our really powerful legal citator tool as well. And that's where it's pulling the citations from. So And the other really cool feature about LexisCheck is that it's actually a Word plugin. So as you're drafting in Microsoft Word, it actually appears at the top of your ribbon, and you can use it to check your document right there in Microsoft Word without leaving your Microsoft Word interface. So it's really cool that it happens and it completes its checks in the space that you're drafting into a truly integrated experience. It also brings back those really helpful signals from Legal Citator as well, again, in your Microsoft Word workspace as well. So really powerful tool and really great for checking citations and also bringing in your parallel citations as well, so that you're making sure that you've got comprehensive, fully cited references in your document. Okay,
Now
so
do you see why? Now do you see why
yes.
why I sounded so excited about that tool? It's not. I'm not trying to market it. It just blew my mind when I heard about it. So yeah, I do have a few more tips, Parusha, that I'd like to share.
Yes, let's go.
So remember, we're in a professional setting, right? So avoid using funny and unusual fonts. I'm a person who loves my fonts, but in a professional setting, there are standard fonts that you should be using. If your document is well formatted, it becomes easy on the eye and a pleasure to read. This doesn't always make sense in the beginning, but now that I'm in a position where I'm often checking memos and reading memos, I find it that I understand what my partners at the time were telling me in terms of my formatting. It really does become a lot easier to review something when it's formatted properly. So for me personally, a pleasantly formatted research memo, this is just some of what how I like to look at it, is using a font of Calibri or Arial. It's just quite standard. It's easy on the eye. Your size can be size 11, maximum size 12. For me, justified text is a must. Like, my mind goes dizzy if it's not justified. I've got a little spacing tips. Your spacing before must be 0 points and spacing after it's 9 points. Now, line spacing, I like to leave it as 1.5, but often if you're doing a first draft and you need someone to check it, you can make it double because it gives space for your seniors to actually write in. But otherwise, I like a 1.5 line spacing. I find one spacing is too thin. Make use of numbered paragraphs and subparagraphs. It really makes it easier for you to follow the discussion. And headings need to have a font style of bold or underline. That's for me quite important. And if you're quoting from texts, use italics. It's easy to distinguish.
Thank you, Azar. Okay, so Azar, we're now getting to the really exciting and thrilling bit of today's webinar. But before we go there, I want to keep you honest, and I want to remind you that you have promised to share an anecdote, right, about the formatting of your research memo.
Yes, when it comes to the researching, the formatting of a research memo. So I had an incident when I was in law school, well, in law clinic and campus, and I had everything that I needed. I did the research, I had the question, I had the answers. When I looked at that memo, I was very proud of it. Obviously, still a law student, right? Never done a research memo in my life. I drafted it very much like an assignment, and I submitted it. Very proud of what I had, only to find my principal calling me in to say, listen, and she was very encouraging, but she taught me a lesson for the rest of my life. She was like, Azar, I don't want to read this. You've got 10 pages here. Yes, it answers everything that I need, but I needed a quick, short answer while, if need be, to check your reasoning behind that answer. So it's important that you properly format and structure your research memo. And that's why I learned the importance of having that executive summary that gives us that spoiler alert. She told me, remember, as a spoiler alert always. While you shouldn't do spoiler alerts for TV shows and for books, a legal research memo is something you should have a spoiler alert for.
Thanks, Azar. Thanks for sharing that with us today. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to hand over to you because you're going to take over for a couple of minutes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now, this is where the fun bit is going to be. I'm going to show you practical steps on filtering when it comes to legal research. Now, I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So when using LexisNexis, there's a lot of powerful ways that I found I could be a lot more efficient with my legal research. I'm just going to
I think I'm going to ask you to repeat that, please, because we lost you there for just 30 seconds or so.
Cool. So like I was mentioning, legal research, you need to be efficient. There's a lot of cool tools that you can use. And sometimes you can get training for free with LexisNexis. But as I was saying, you can actually use tools to make your research more efficient. I just want to check if it's still me. I seem to have frozen. Arusha, can you guys
Azar, you still with us?
there?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you're still with us, but you broke up there for a moment again.
So when it comes to doing your research, research can be, like I said, a bit tedious because we're searching for a needle in a haystack, and knowing how to efficiently use your tools can sometimes help you sift through and find your information quite easily. And having an understanding of exactly what you're looking for sometimes can help you be a lot quicker, more efficient, and really start to enjoy your research. So one of the things that I wanted to show you guys is really how I filter through my information and find what I'm looking for quite quickly with a click of a few buttons. So I'm going to use an example of searching for a case of misrepresentation. So I'm just going to type in once I've logged into LexisNexis, I'm going to type in misrepresentation. I think Zoom is not agreeing with me today. Just bear with me for a second. My computer has frozen. All right, so I've got misrepresentation and I'm going to click enter. And as you can see, quite a bit of results. I know I'm particularly looking for, say, for example, a case. So I'm going to tick off case law, and I can see that there's over 4,000 search results. So to find that under document type, I went and I said I wanted case law. I've got 4,611 results. Probably the reason why research is quite tedious. I have to go through 4,000 cases to find what I'm looking for. But there's a few buttons that will really help me find what I'm looking for quite easily. So as a starting point, Parusha mentioned earlier the cited signals on legal citation that help us find if a case is good, bad, or cautionary. That's quite helpful for me, and sometimes we need to understand what are strong cases, but sometimes we also need to understand what are the weak cases. For example, we could be relying on a specific case, and it could be bad in law. So we need to understand what the position of our case is. And when I say bad in law, it means it was overturned by another court, or cautionary was another court was like, we're not going to say it's bad, but we don't necessarily agree with it. So those citing signals will really help me find exactly what I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for cases that really agree with what I'm looking for, I can use the citing signals. But a lot more exciting, what I enjoy, misrepresentation, as everyone here would know, or most of you would know, can be something that's quite wide. You can have misrepresentation in the case of a contract. You can have misrepresentation in the case of insurance. There's a lot of elements of where misrepresentation can be. So what I'm going to show you is something cool. It's a filter by subject area. And when I filter by subject area, it will allow me to now look at narrow down my search results. Remember, we had over 4,600 cases on misrepresentation, and I know I'm looking specifically for misrepresentation insofar as it deals, say, for example, with insurance, because I'm from an predominantly insurance law firm. I'm going to go and I'm going to find insurance in this little box, and I can see from over 4,600 search results, I'm now down to 42 search results, exactly what I need, making my search a lot more efficient. So that's one of the things that I love doing. A lot of people don't realize you can actually use these filters to break down your search. Also, something that can sometimes be quite helpful is sometimes we're dealing with matters and we're looking for case law on particular points. Now, there's two ways you can find case law dealing with legislation. might have frozen again. Apologies. There we go. So there's two ways that this can sort of work. There's a filter called reference X, right? And this will help me find case law that deals with my subject area. So I've already selected one case law that deals with misrepresentation in the insurance context. And if I go to reference X, I can select X. So I can click more to see the different X that would apply. And say, for example, I wanted the Short-Term Insurance Act, and I click on Update. This will now bring me down to 3 cases. So this will show me that, listen, Nazar, there are 3 cases that deal with misrepresentation insofar as it deals with insurance, and that deal particularly with the Short-Term Insurance Act. So that really does narrow down my search from over 4,600 cases to just 3 cases, and it took me less than 5 minutes to do that. Another way I could do this is by opening legislation within the particular platform that I'm using. So if I was to find my legislation, and as an example, I'm looking for, we'll use the Short-Term Insurance Act again as an example. Short-Term Insurance Act. And I open my case, or I open my piece of legislation, I can actually open and I can find case law that deals with specific sections just by using the legal citator. So this is one of the tools that I really love, and I find it to be quite helpful. So I can actually go there and I can find, okay, listen, with regards to Section 41, there was a case that dealt with Section 41 of the Short-Term Insurance Act. And in fact, that judgment was from 2019. And I can see that it's a case that's good in law because of the green signals that are blurring in front of my face. And the next thing that's quite interesting for me as well is I can actually open the case from here. So playing around on the platform, I've come to learn that a red citation means it's available on LexisNexis. Black citation is your parallel citation that you can use, but actually clicking on the red citation will open the case for me. And I find that to be just fascinating. And then again, Parusha mentioned their legal citator, which has a judgment analysis telling us how whether the case is good, bad, or cautionary. So I find it to be quite interesting that I can do all of this with the click of a button. And the judgment analysis has so much information that you can pull through on a specific case. It helps me sometimes filter through exactly what I'm looking for. And one more thing that I just want to show everyone, or rather 2 last things that I wanted to show everyone, was I mentioned the folders. So if I'm working on a specific matter, so I can create a folder for a specific matter, and I've created one for matter X versus Y as an example, and I can now go and save this case as part of my document trail by clicking document options and save to folder. Now, the reason why I prefer to do this is, let me select my folder, and let's say research. The reason why I prefer to do this, go and save. The reason why I prefer to do this is sometimes having so much of information on your computer, you're downloading it onto your desktop, it makes your desktop a bit slower. And then also you may delete it after some time, and then a little while later someone says, listen, you remember you did the research memo a while ago for me? And you now need to go back and try and find these things. That can sometimes be a bit difficult. So that's why I love that. The last thing that the last thing that I wanted to sort of show you is I mentioned the citator that I use quite a lot to see if a case is good, bad in law. We know LexisNexis doesn't publish all of our law reports. Sometimes we find law reports in other places. What can sometimes be helpful is that the legal citator still has judgment analysis even if they haven't published the case. So an example of this kind of case is I've done one recently, and I'm going to type in the name of the case and hope that it jumps with me today. Sorry, this is the advanced search. I want my legal citator, and I'm going to go to cases, and I'm going to type, there we go. It should give me the details of the case I'm looking for in a moment. Right, so the Life Healthcare Group versus Suleiman is an example of a case that I know is not on the platform, and it still gives me this sort of judgment analysis on the case, giving me a little bit of information on the case, telling me about the rules and the regulations that it may have dealt with. So this dealt with the specific rule, so it really does still give me what I'm looking for, even if the case isn't reported on LexisNexis. So those are some of my favorite features that I like to use.
Azar, thank you. And I think some of us had a little bit of connectivity problems while you were going through that little bit, that short demo. So I just want to sum up. You covered a lot of ground in, I think, 5 minutes. So I'll do my best to summarize. But basically, you were saying how you can start from a really broad search, and how you can refine using our powerful search post filters, for example, and then deciding on topics, deciding on relevant legislation as well. And how you can then get leads into the core documents around your legislation. You can jump to legal citator, those little graphical signals of legal citator, the little green ticks that you guys saw on the screen, always give legal professionals a sense of confidence when they're referencing their case law as well. And I love the tip around client folders that you also shared with everyone, right? Saving your documents to folders so that you've always got it there and accessible. I've tried to find things in my inbox, right? In my Outlook inbox from like years ago. Guys, doesn't work. Save it in the platform. It really is better, better for you as well. And you've got it all in one place, and you know that it's going to be safe. The other top tip that I actually want to share around folders, just very briefly, is that if you're sharing, if you're saving a legislative document, for example, a national act, let's take the Short-Term Insurance Act because you mentioned it. If you actually save that to your folders, it also operates as a little bookmark / favorite feature as well. So you can save it to your folders, and then every time you go onto the platform and you access it via your folders, it actually goes back to the source document that will be updated with the latest amendments as well. So it's not a static document that's only accurate for that point in time when you're saving it to your folders, but it actually will be a link back into the most recent amendments as well. So it's like I said, it also operates as a little bit of a favorites feature as well on the platform. Okay, so back to our presentation, and I know that there's been a lot of interest coming up in the comments and in Q&A as well about AI, which we promised people to cover as well. So let's head over to this particular topic here. So we just wanted to start off by setting a little bit of context for everyone, right? We're all tracking very closely all of the technological trends that are happening in the AI space. And we've all been seeing a couple of headlines like this hit our desks this year. So just to give you a little bit of a feel for what's happening globally as well. And a report that Goldman Sachs released earlier this year in 2023, they mentioned that generative AI, which ChatGPT is an example of, is going to impact around 300 million job losses, right, in the sectors. You can see that we've got a little bit of a summary of the sectors that they say are going to be impacted the most. Legal services, mentioned as the second sector that's going to be impacted the most, 44%. That's a really high percentile that they're referencing as well. So a lot of concern around this as well, job security in the industry as well. But yeah, this is what we're logging into every day and seeing in the news as well. Azar, I know that you also wanted to mention a couple of things around this theme.
No, 100%. So as you guys heard in my bio that Parusha was talking about, I'm very keen on legal tech. And looking at legal tech, particularly when we look at AI, firstly, that 44%, as scary as it sounds, it doesn't necessarily mean your job is going to be replaced by AI. We still need human living lawyers who can apply substance, right? But AI is really disrupting our sector in terms of how we offer services to clients. Lawyers are traditionally service-driven, and what AI is going to allow us to do is going to allow us to change the industry to shift from solely service driven to a service and product driven industry where you can have products available for your clients to purchase directly from you. Now, on one important point on AI, and I think it's something a lot of people don't really fully grasp. If we look at AI, artificial intelligence is basically like a child or a baby, right? What you put in and what you sort of feed it and teach it is what will come out of it, if that makes sense. That's basically how AI works.
Thank you, Azar. Thanks for that. And just while on this topic, it's very important that we actually, when we're talking about AI, it's about how we start to leverage it within the profession as well. Now, you also shared a really great anecdote with me earlier on, right? When we were catching up personally. Okay, I'm not going to give it away. I'm just going to mention the word New Zealand. Do you want to share it with our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, AI can be great, and there's a lot of amazing tools that we can use to leverage and work on. But as lawyers, we need to remember that we need to have a risk-driven approach when it comes to AI, and using tools like ChatGPT. Everyone loves ChatGPT these days because it seems to make all of our lives a million times easier. The biggest concern that I want to draw people's attention to is, one, don't take everything you get there to be the gospel truth or whatever it is. There is a degree of checking that you need to do on what's happening. Remember, platforms like that, generative AI is open-based, right? Like I mentioned, what you put in is what you get out. So it's not always accurate. Now, I was telling Parusha a story a little bit earlier. I got wind of. So in New Zealand, there was a lawyer who was using ChatGPT for legal research. Again, it's not a legal research tool, right? But this attorney was using it for legal research. So he asked for guidance, for case law on a specific topic. And ChatGPT was like, great, here's the case, gave them a name of a case and a little summary on what the case is. So the attorney was like, okay, cool, I need to get this case. He couldn't find it. So he sent it to the New Zealand Law Society library to get of the case, only to find out that no such case existed. ChatGPT fabricated, or rather created out of thin air, a whole new case, created its summary of what happened and what the outcome was, created a summary of what that case is. Moral of the story is you need to apply a lot of scrutiny when you're relying on these platforms. They are not research platforms. And again, I'm going to share one more quick story. What you put in is what you get out. So I'm not too sure how many people have seen Snap AI. Snapchat has a new little friend for you called Your AI. And when you open Your AI, I actually saw an interesting video recently where someone typed in, who is the current monarch of the United Kingdom? And Snap AI came and said, you know what, it's Queen Elizabeth. So the person actually came back and was like, no, Queen Elizabeth died on this date. The current monarch is King Charles III. Snap AI then corrected itself, and when asked the question again, gave the answer King Charles III. This person then wanted to test it a little bit more to see whether or not the system, picks up on things. Does it fact check anything? And went and said, no, but King Charles III has passed on, and the new king is King William. And when asked then again that question, Snap AI said the current monarch of the United Kingdom is King William, because King Charles III passed on X date that was trained into the system. So quite interesting, as you can see how AI works, how it can be trained and manipulated, and how those results come out. So remember, apply some caution.
Thank you, Azar. A cautionary tale indeed. Speaking of ChatGPT, I just want to share with everyone that Azar and I did a little bit of experimenting earlier today. So we asked ChatGPT, hey, can we use you to complete legal research? And as we've mentioned, ChatGPT itself said to us that you should not be using me, and said, it's always recommended to consult with a qualified attorney or legal professional who's got access to the most up-to-date legal resources. So yeah, I think this is also quite an important and key takeaway for today's session. The model itself doesn't recommend us using him when completing legal research. So remember those takeaways, right? You need to have access to a current legal database, to specific case information, to authoritative legal commentary as well, and to updated precedents as well when it comes to your drafting and referencing as well. That brings me to our next slide, as I'm a little bit wary of time because we are overrunning a little bit. But our next slide just gives us a little bit of a summary of some of the points that you and I covered today around generative AI and legal research and the shortcomings around it, right? You mentioned in your research memo how important things like citation references are. And the reality is that you can't get that on ChatGPT, right? So it's also linked to open source content, as you keep on mentioning and reminding and drilling into us, Asa. So thank you for that. There's no way of vetting those sources as well. So that's really great feedback. And Adele, I see you're asking a very pertinent question around whether LexisNexis is ever going to get our own AI. I want to close today's session by saying to you that our counterparts in the US, so LexisNexis US, are actually getting ready to launch this within their region. So it's Lexis Plus AI. You can see just by the visual on the screen, it's very exciting, it's very dynamic, it's very dramatic as well. You can see that what we've got here is we've got a connection to an authoritative legal research platform. You've got referencing in here. You've got links to those references as well, so that you can go in and read these references and these citations for yourself as well. Now, this is the power of being able to connect a generative AI model with a powerful research platform. And this is the potential that's out there and the possibilities that exist. So I'll leave that to consider that for a moment. I'll leave you to consider that for a moment. And as we are running out of time, so I'm not going to ask the questions, but there were some really great questions that came through in the chat. Let's talk afterwards about how we get some information available to today's attendees on these questions, if you don't mind. Okay,
100%.
So thank you. Yeah, so Azar, thank you as always for your time and for your passion that you bring to us in these sessions. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for sharing some of your valuable time with us today, and to all of our attendees. Similarly, thank you for sharing your time with us today. We know how busy all of you are. We know how valuable your time is as well. So thank you for staying with us for the full hour. We really, really do appreciate it. And thank you for keeping the chat lively and fun and engaging as well. Keep a lookout for those emails from LexisNexis in terms of sharing the recording, as well as that helpful downloadable resource that Azar has promised all of us as well. Azar.
And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I hope this was helpful. I see Parusha dropped into the chat of our various LinkedIn profiles, so you feel free to pop a message if you've got any questions. So the questions that are here, Parusha and I will have a chat in a little bit to see how we can answer your questions offline.
Thank you, Azar.